My family kicked me out on my 18th birthday. Years later they tried to take over my home. So I taught them a lesson they'll regret. So, my 18th birthday, it should have been a big deal, right? Like a milestone or whatever. I was expecting at least a small family dinner, maybe some cake, just a chance to relax, you know. But nah, things went the opposite way, and it still feels unreal. I had zero clue what was about to happen when I woke up that morning. I remember walking into the kitchen, the smell of coffee hitting me like every other day. My dad was sitting at the table with this serious look on his face, but it wasn't the you messed up kind of serious, more like he was getting ready to deliver some big news. My mom was standing near the sink, her back to me, pretending to wash dishes, but I could tell she was just avoiding eye contact. I was like, hey, what's going on? Trying to read the room. And then my dad just says, Steve, you're 18 now. Time to be on your own. That was it, flat and cold, like he was telling me the weather. I just stood there, kind of shocked, waiting for him to laugh or something, like it was a joke. But no, he was dead serious. I asked, wait, what do you mean? And he goes, you're an adult. It's time for you to leave and figure things out. I looked over at my mom, hoping she'd say something, anything, but she just kept her back turned, scrubbing the same plate over and over. At that moment, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I mean, I get it, people move out at 18, but this was like a total surprise. No heads up, no discussion about plans or saving money, nothing. And it wasn't like we were struggling financially, they could easily afford to keep me there while I figured out my next steps. But nope, I was expected to pack up and get out right then and there. So I asked, where am I supposed to go? And my dad just shrugs, like it wasn't his problem anymore. Figure it out, Steve. You're an adult. My head was spinning. It felt like one of those moments where everything's moving in slow motion and you're just stuck trying to process it all. I didn't even know where to start. I was like, wait, am I in trouble? Did I do something? And he just repeated, it's time to grow up. It's funny because up until that point, I thought I had a pretty okay relationship with them. Sure, we had our arguments, but nothing that seemed like a get out and don't come back kind of thing. So I started asking, is this about me not going to college right away? I told you I needed time to figure things out. But my dad just waved me off, saying, you've been freeloading for long enough. It's time to go. I felt my face get hot, that kind of anger that makes your hands shake, but there was nothing I could say to change his mind. I stood there for what felt like forever, hoping my mom would jump in, but she stayed silent, like I wasn't even there. That hurt more than anything my dad said. It was like she had already checked out of caring about me. Finally, I just gave up arguing. What was the point? I went to my room, grabbed the biggest duffel bag I could find, and started shoving my stuff in, clothes, some books, my laptop, anything I thought I'd need. It was all happening so fast, and I felt this tightness in my chest, like I couldn't breathe. The walls of my room felt like they were closing in, like this place I'd called home for so long was suddenly suffocating me. I remember looking around my room at all the posters and random stuff I had collected over the years. It was like watching my childhood get packed away in minutes. The room felt empty and cold when I was done, and it hit me that this was it, I wasn't going to be coming back. When I came back out with my duffel bag, my dad didn't even look up from his coffee. My mom finally turned around, but she just looked past me, like I was some stranger passing through. I tried one last time, are you really just going to kick me out like this? She finally spoke, but her voice was so cold, it's for your own good, Steve. I didn't know what to say, it felt like everything was happening to someone else, like I was watching my life from the outside. I walked out of the house, my bag slung over my shoulder, feeling the weight of every step. I stood on the driveway for a minute, just staring at the house, hoping maybe they'd change their minds. But the door stayed closed. They didn't even bother to come out and say goodbye. As I walked down the street, I felt lost. I didn't have a plan, no idea where I was going to go. I started calling friends one by one, hoping someone would let me crash for the night. A couple of them were cool with it at first, but you could tell they were hesitating, like they didn't want to get too involved. I guess I can't blame them. Who wants a couch surfer showing up with no end date in sight? I ended up at my buddy Mark's place. He and his roommate were chill enough to let me crash for a few days. I remember lying on his couch that first night, staring up at the ceiling, feeling this weird mix of anger and confusion. Like, how did it go from a regular morning to being homeless in a matter of hours? It's crazy because I kept thinking it was some kind of mistake or test, like they were waiting for me to figure something out and come back. But the more time passed, the more I realized they were serious. They didn't want me there. It was like this punch in the gut, realizing your own family doesn't have your back. The first few nights weren't too bad. Mark and his roommate were cool, and we'd stay up late playing video games and joking around. But after a while, I could tell they were getting tired of having me there, and honestly, I was starting to feel like a burden too. There's only so many times you can hear "Hey man, any luck with finding a place?" before it starts to sting. So after about a week, I packed up my stuff and moved on to another friend's place. After a few weeks of bouncing from couch to couch, it started becoming clear that I was running out of places to go. Friends that I thought would have my back started making excuses, like "Hey man, my roommate's getting annoyed," or "My girlfriend's coming over a lot, and it's getting crowded." It wasn't like they were being jerks or anything. I get it, no one signs up for a long-term couch guest, and the longer I stayed, the more I could see it in their eyes. They were itching for me to move on, even if they didn't say it directly. But once the couches dried up, that's when things got real. I didn't have enough money for a motel, and sleeping in my car became the new normal. I tried to make the best of it. I set up my back seat like a cramped little bed, threw in some blankets and a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, but it was all I had. I parked in quiet spots, like behind gyms or in the corners of supermarket parking lots, hoping to avoid getting noticed. You never realize how loud parking lots are until you're trying to sleep in one. People coming and going, headlights flashing through the windows. Every noise had me on edge. The first few nights, I barely slept. My body would ache from being crammed in such a small space, and every noise outside made me jump. I'd wake up to security guards knocking on my window, telling me to move along. It's humiliating when you have to pack up and drive off, pretending like it's no big deal, when really you're just trying to find another spot to crash. I tried to make a routine out of it. I'd park at a 24-hour gym, using my membership to sneak in for showers and bathrooms. It felt like my only luxury, a hot shower. It kept me feeling human when everything else was slipping away. I kept a backpack with my essentials, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and some snacks. It was weird having my life reduced to such a small amount of stuff. During the day, I'd spend hours in my car applying for jobs on my phone, wherever I could find free Wi-Fi. It felt like I was throwing resumes into a black hole. I'd get the occasional "We'll keep your application on file," but nothing concrete. I started applying to places I never imagined working at: fast food chains, call centers, gas stations. At that point, I would have taken anything. One night, I thought maybe my family would have come around. It had been weeks, and I figured maybe they'd check in, see if I was okay. I decided to call my mom again. I didn't expect much, but I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd have a change of heart. When she picked up, her voice was flat, like I was a stranger. "Hey Mom, it's me. Just checking in." She didn't even ask how I was doing. It was just, "What do you need, Steve?" That stung. It was like every bit of hope I had got sucked out in that moment. But I tried to keep it cool. "I was wondering if there's any chance I could stay with you guys for a bit, just till I get back on my feet." She didn't hesitate. "We already talked about this. We can't have you freeloading, Steve. You need to figure this out." The way she said it, so cold and detached, made my stomach drop. I felt like I was begging, and she was just shutting me down like I was some random guy asking for money on the street. I tried again, desperate. "I'm not asking for much, Mom. Just a couch. I'll pay rent once I start making money. I'm just stuck right now." There was a long pause, and for a second, I thought maybe she was considering it. But when she spoke again, it was just the same: "We all have our responsibilities. You're an adult now, and it's time to act like it." I hung up. I didn't even say goodbye. It was like a final slap in the face, knowing that my own mom didn't care if I was struggling. It felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I stared at my phone, watching the screen fade to black, realizing that I was completely and totally alone in this. After that call, something shifted. I stopped reaching out to people. It felt like every time I did, it just reminded me of how alone I really was. So I kept my head down and tried to survive the best way I could. I started parking in different places every night, trying not to stick out. The last thing I needed was for someone to recognize me and start asking questions. I didn't want anyone knowing how bad things had gotten. I was spending a lot of time in public libraries during the day, using their Wi-Fi and charging my phone. I'd sit at the same spot near the back, my duffel bag at my feet, pretending like I was just another person studying or reading. But inside, I felt this constant tension, like at any moment someone was going to look at me and know I didn't belong. There's this weird thing about being homeless: everything feels like a fight to keep your dignity. You don't want people to know you're struggling, but at the same time, you're doing everything you can just to get by. I remember this one night, parked behind a supermarket. It was late, and I was trying to fall asleep when a cop knocked on my window. I jolted awake, heart pounding. I rolled down the window, trying to act like everything was normal. "What are you doing here?" he asked, shining his flashlight inside. I tried to explain, but the look on his face said it all. He didn't care about my story. "You can't stay here, man. Move along." I nodded, trying not to sound bitter. "Yeah, sorry. I'll move." As I started my car and pulled out of the lot, I felt that familiar mix of anger and shame bubbling up again. It felt like no matter where I went, I was a problem. I drove around for an hour, aimlessly, trying to find another spot. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour fast food place, and that became my new spot for the night. I watched people go through the drive-thru, laughing and talking, while I huddled in the back of my car, trying to get some rest. It felt like there was this whole world moving on without me, and I was stuck on the outside, watching. Eventually, I learned how to blend in better. I'd park in different spots every night and get up early enough to move before anyone noticed. I became good at finding the quiet places, those hidden corners of lots where no one really cared. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was temporary, that any minute someone would come knocking again, telling me to move on. Every day was about finding the next spot, the next place to rest. It was this cycle of packing up, driving, unpacking, and repeating it all over again. I started feeling like I was in survival mode all the time, like I couldn't let my guard down, not even for a second. There were days when I'd sit in my car, staring at my phone, wondering if I should call anyone, my family, friends, even my brother. But I knew how those calls would go. I knew they'd either laugh or tell me to man up. So I just stopped trying. It felt like every time I reached out, I was proving them right, proving that I was the screw-up they thought I was. But through all of it, I kept applying for jobs, kept trying to find a way out. I didn't want to stay stuck in that car forever. I was determined to find something, even if it was just a tiny chance to pull myself out of the mess I was in. But man, it was a lonely fight. Living out of my car wasn't easy, but after a while, I got into a rhythm. I figured out where to park, what time to move, and how to stay invisible. It was all about survival, just keeping my head down and pushing through. But man, even with all that, there were days where I felt like I was just going in circles. I spent a lot of my days at a 24-hour gym. I had this cheap membership that let me shower and keep myself somewhat clean. It was one of the only places where I didn't feel completely out of place. I'd go there, clean up, and then sit in my car applying for any job I could find. It was like a full-time hustle, and it felt like for every 10 applications I sent out, maybe one would get a response. And those responses were usually the same: "We appreciate your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates." I was starting to feel like maybe this was it, that I'd just be stuck like this. But then one day, I finally caught a break. A retail store called me for an interview. I remember getting that call and feeling this mix of hope and nerves. It wasn't a dream job by any means, but at that point, anything was better than nothing. I showed up to the interview wearing the best clothes I had, which was basically the cleanest shirt from my car and some jeans that were starting to fray at the ends. I walked in, trying to act like I had everything together, but inside I was a mess. I was thinking, please, just give me a chance. The manager, this guy named Tony, seemed chill enough. We talked for a bit, and he asked the usual questions: availability, experience, stuff like that. I tried to stay confident, like I had it all figured out, but I could tell he saw through it a bit. Then he asked, "Do you have reliable transportation?" I hesitated for a second, thinking about how I basically lived in my car, but I just nodded. "Yeah, I've got a car." I left out the part where it was my makeshift home. Tony stared at me for a moment, like he was sizing me up, then he said, "All right, you're hired. It's minimum wage, and you'll start next week." Man, I can't even describe the relief I felt. It wasn't much, but it was something. It felt like I finally had a shot to get out of the mess I was in. That night, for the first time in a while, I actually felt hopeful. I parked my car in my usual spot and, instead of feeling defeated, I was thinking about how I was going to make this work. The first few weeks at the retail job were rough. It was long hours, mostly on my feet, dealing with customers and stocking shelves. But I didn't mind. I threw myself into it, working every shift they offered. I'd show up early, stay late, and basically just try to make myself useful. Tony noticed. He'd give me a nod every now and then, and sometimes he'd tell me, "Good job, Steve." It wasn't much, but it felt like someone actually saw the effort I was putting in. With the job came paychecks, and with paychecks came a bit of stability. I wasn't rolling in cash or anything, but I could finally afford to buy food without having to count every dollar. I started saving whatever I could, even if it was just a few bucks at a time. My car still doubled as my bed, but at least I didn't have to worry about starving. I'd make little meals from whatever I could get cheap at the store, bread, canned stuff, nothing fancy, but it worked. After a couple of months, I was even able to scrape together enough to split a cheap condo with a guy named Mike. He was looking for a roommate, and honestly, I was just grateful for a place with 4 walls and a roof. We weren't best friends or anything, but he was chill enough. We agreed to split the rent and utilities right down the middle, and that was that. Moving into that condo felt like a victory. For the first time in months, I had a bed, a real one, and a kitchen to cook in. I remember the first night I stayed there, just lying on that bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling like I'd finally caught a break. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it felt like I was finally clawing my way out of the hole I'd been stuck in for so long. But life has a way of knocking you down just when you start to feel steady. A few months in, the pandemic hit, and everything went sideways. The store I worked at shut down temporarily, and like dominoes, my little setup started falling apart. At first, I thought it'd be a short-term thing, like we'd close for a couple of weeks and then get back to normal. But it didn't take long before it was clear that wasn't going to happen. I got the call one afternoon. Tony was on the other end, and his voice was strained. "Hey Steve, I'm sorry, but we've got to let you go. We're not sure when we'll reopen." I tried to stay calm, but inside I felt everything crumbling again. I thanked him for the opportunity, but the minute I hung up, I just sat there, staring at my phone, wondering what the hell I was going to do now. My roommate Mike was in the same boat. He lost his job too, and without either of us making money, the rent became impossible to keep up with. We stretched it as far as we could, pooling whatever savings we had, but eventually it wasn't enough. We had to break the lease, and just like that, I was back to square one. Packing my stuff into my car again felt like some cruel joke. It was like life was taunting me, saying, "Nice try, but not quite." I didn't have many options left, so I rigged up the back of my car with some old blankets, turning it into a camper setup. It wasn't great, but at least it was mine. I drove around looking for a spot where I could stay without getting hassled and found this old lot behind a strip mall. It was quiet enough, and no one seemed to care that I was there. I sat in my makeshift camper, looking out the window at the empty lot, and felt this wave of frustration. It felt like every step forward came with 2 steps back. But I tried to remind myself that I'd been here before, and I'd gotten through it. I knew how to hustle, how to survive. I just had to do it all over again. There were nights where I'd lay there, staring at the ceiling of my car, feeling the weight of it all. It's hard to stay hopeful when everything feels temporary, like you're one step away from losing it all again. But at the same time, I knew I had no choice but to keep pushing forward. I'd done it once, and I'd have to do it again. The days started to blur together. I'd wake up early, head to the gym for a shower, and then spend hours looking for work online. I applied for everything: warehouses, grocery stores, delivery gigs, anything that would get me back on my feet. The stress was constant, but I kept telling myself, you just need one chance, one job, to get things moving again. Some nights, I'd pull up to the same fast food place and park in the corner of the lot, watching the cars go through the drive-thru, headlights cutting through the darkness. It felt like the world was still moving while I was stuck in place, waiting for something to give. But as rough as it was, I refused to let myself give up. I'd made it through before, and somehow I was going to do it again. Living in my car again felt like hitting the reset button, but this time with an even bigger challenge. I had been through this once already, so I knew the drill, but there was this constant weight on my shoulders. It's like, yeah, I knew what to do, but man, it felt 10 times harder to get back up when everything was closing down around me. Everywhere I looked, businesses were shutting their doors, and the job market was tighter than ever. I kept applying for anything I could find, but it was getting bleak. Weeks went by, and every day felt the same, sending out resumes, checking my phone, and seeing nothing but rejections or worse, no replies at all. I started to wonder if I was ever going to catch a break again. I knew I couldn't stay stuck like this, but without an income, it felt like I was trapped in a loop. But then one morning, I got a call. It was from this warehouse I'd applied to weeks ago. Honestly, I'd almost forgotten about it because I sent out so many applications. The guy on the phone sounded straightforward. "Steve, we've got an opening. It's long hours, but if you're available, you can start next Monday." I remember sitting there in my car, gripping the phone, trying not to sound too desperate as I agreed. I could barely believe it, finally a break. The warehouse was about 30 minutes away from where I'd been parking my car, and I was ready to do whatever it took to make it work. The day before my shift, I drove over there to check out the area, and I parked my car in a lot nearby, figuring I'd sleep there for the night. It wasn't the best spot, but I wanted to be close enough to make sure I got there on time. When I showed up for the first shift, I was nervous. It was one of those massive warehouses with rows and rows of boxes, pallets stacked high. I walked in, and it was loud, forklifts buzzing around, people shouting instructions. I felt a bit out of place at first, but I told myself to just focus on getting through the day. My boss, Mr. Thompson, was this older guy, gruff but fair. He gave me the rundown, showing me what needed to be done, moving boxes, sorting inventory, loading trucks. It was physically demanding, but that didn't bother me. I was just grateful to be working again. I pushed myself hard that first day, lifting everything I could, moving as fast as possible, just trying to show that I wasn't some lazy guy off the street. After my shift, I went up to Mr. Thompson, and I figured I'd ask a favor. Hey, I know this is kind of a weird request, but is it okay if I park my car in the lot here? Just until I get things figured out. I expected him to say no, but he paused, studying me for a second. You planning on sticking around, Steve? He asked, and I nodded. Absolutely. I'm here to work. He scratched his head for a moment, then nodded back. All right, just make sure you're not in anyone's way, and you can hook up to the outlet over there if you need power. I felt this wave of relief. It might have been a small thing for him, but for me, it was huge. Being able to park without worrying about getting kicked out was like a weight lifting off my chest. That night, I pulled my car into a corner of the lot and plugged in, setting up my little camper space. Having lights and a bit of heat felt like a luxury. For the first time in a while, I didn't have to worry about someone banging on my window telling me to move. I lay down in the back of my car, staring up at the roof, feeling a bit of hope creeping back in. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small step forward. The next few weeks were a grind. The warehouse job was tough, long shifts, heavy lifting, and sometimes we'd be there until late at night. But I showed up early every day, making sure I was ready for anything they needed. Mr. Thompson noticed. He'd nod at me sometimes, giving me a thumbs up when I finished a task. It wasn't like we were buddies or anything, but I could tell he respected hard work. I started saving again. This time, I was smarter about it. Every paycheck, I'd set aside as much as I could. I cut back on everything, eating the cheapest stuff I could find, skipping meals when I had to. It was all about building up a safety net so I wouldn't have to live in my car forever. I knew it wasn't going to be an overnight thing, but I kept my head down and focused. One day, after a long shift, Mr. Thompson pulled me aside. I thought maybe I'd messed something up, but instead he said, "You've been putting in the effort, Steve. We've got an opening for a night supervisor. You interested?" My heart was pounding. A supervisor role, that meant more money, more stability. I nodded so fast I probably looked desperate, but I didn't care. "Yes, absolutely," I said. The promotion was a game changer. It wasn't a huge raise, but it was enough that I could start thinking about the future. I started looking online for cheap apartments or even small manufactured homes. It felt good to have options again, to feel like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. As the weeks went by, I got better at the job. I learned how to manage shipments, oversee other workers, and make sure everything ran smoothly. It felt good to have responsibility, like I was proving to myself that I could handle more. And the best part, I was getting closer to my goal. Every dollar saved was one step closer to getting out of my car for good. I remember this one night, after a long shift, I was sitting in my car looking up places online, and I found this manufactured home that was within my budget. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and it was in a quiet park not too far from the warehouse. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. It felt like I was finally getting a glimpse of a life that wasn't just about scraping by. I saved the listing and told myself, just a few more months of grinding, and this could be yours. It was the first time in ages that I felt like I was actually building something, not just surviving day to day. I lay back in my car that night, feeling this mix of exhaustion and excitement. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The days blurred into weeks, and I kept my routine, early mornings, late nights, working as hard as I could. Mr. Thompson kept giving me more responsibilities, and with every shift, I felt a bit more secure. It was like, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting to everything falling apart, I was actually in control, and it felt good. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Living out of my car was still rough. There were nights when the cold crept in, and no amount of blankets could keep me warm enough. But I held on to the thought of that manufactured home, of finally having a place that was mine, where I wouldn't have to worry about being kicked out or moving on. That hope was enough to keep me going. So that's where I was, working, saving, and slowly, bit by bit, building something for myself. It wasn't easy, but I knew I was on the right track. After months of grinding and saving, things were finally looking up. I'd saved enough to seriously consider getting that manufactured home I'd been eyeing. I remember driving past it a few times, just to get a feel for the neighborhood. It was a quiet spot, surrounded by trees and tucked away from the main road. It felt like the kind of place where I could actually breathe for once. It was far from fancy, but to me, it was perfect. One afternoon, I called the real estate agent listed on the sign. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if they ran a credit check and saw my terrible history? What if someone else already put an offer down? But I pushed those thoughts aside and waited as the phone rang. The agent was this cheerful guy named Pete. He asked a few basic questions, and I tried my best to sound confident, like I wasn't living out of my car and just barely making it. We set up a time for me to come check out the place. When I hung up, I felt this weird mix of nerves and excitement. This could be my shot at turning things around for good, but it also felt like everything was riding on it. The day of the viewing, I pulled up to the home early, parked my car around the corner, and tried to make myself look presentable. I had one decent button-up shirt left, and I hoped it would be enough. Pete was already there when I walked up, a big smile on his face. He shook my hand and started showing me around. Inside, it was simple, a small kitchen, a living room, and 3 bedrooms. The walls were plain, and the floors were a bit scuffed up, but it felt right. I could already picture myself fixing it up, making it mine. Pete talked about how it was a good starter home, how the previous owner had kept it in decent shape, and how it was a great opportunity for someone looking to build a future. I nodded along, trying not to let on how badly I wanted this to work. After the tour, he asked if I was interested in putting down an offer. I told him I was, and we sat down at the tiny kitchen table to go through the paperwork. My hands were still a bit shaky, but I tried to keep my voice steady as I filled everything out. We talked numbers, and when he mentioned the down payment, I felt a bit of relief. I had saved enough, but just barely. The next few days were tense. Pete said it would take some time for the paperwork to go through, and he'd have to check everything out on his end. I spent those days at work trying to focus, but my mind was always drifting back to that house. I kept thinking, this could be it. This could finally be my home. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, hoping it was Pete with good news. One afternoon, while I was on my break at the warehouse, I finally got the call. Pete's voice was bright, and he said, "Steve, congratulations, the place is yours." I just stood there, holding my phone, not really believing it. I thanked him a bunch of times, and when I hung up, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. I did it. I actually did it. I drove over to the house later that day and just stood outside, looking at it. It wasn't much, but it was mine. All the nights spent in my car, all the rough patches, it felt like they had finally led to something. I had a place where I didn't have to worry about getting kicked out or moving every night. It was a real home. Moving in was another challenge, but this time it was the kind of challenge I wanted. I had to clean up the place, get some basic furniture, and make it livable. I started with the essentials, a mattress, a small table, and a couple of chairs. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough to get started. I spent my first night in the house sleeping on that mattress, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally relax. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into fixing the place up. I patched up the scuffed floors, painted the walls, and slowly started filling the space with things I'd collected over the years. It felt like every little improvement I made was a step toward reclaiming my life. It was my way of proving to myself that I wasn't just scraping by anymore, I was building something real. But of course, life has a way of dragging you back, no matter how far you think you've come. A few weeks after moving in, I made a mistake. I posted about the new place on social media. I guess I was feeling proud and wanted to share it, even if I hadn't talked to most of my family in ages. I posted a picture of me holding the keys in front of the door, captioned it with something like "From living in my car to owning my first home, never give up." The response was huge. Friends, old coworkers, even some people I hadn't spoken to in years were leaving comments and congratulating me. It felt good to have that support. But then, of course, the past had to show up. One afternoon, I was unpacking a box of kitchen supplies when there was a knock on my door. I thought it might be a neighbor stopping by to say hello, but when I opened it, I was met with a familiar face, Dan, my older brother, standing there with his wife and kids. "Hey Steve, saw your post. Nice place you got here," he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. His wife and kids followed, looking around like they were scoping the place out. I was caught off guard. "Dan, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice tight. Dan gave me this casual shrug, like it was no big deal. "Well, since you've got all this space now, and it's just you, we were thinking maybe we could move in. You wouldn't even notice us." I stood there, my hands tightening into fists. I was furious. No, Dan. This is my home. That's when he pulled out some papers and waved them in front of me. Look, we even drew up rental agreements. You can stay in your camper, it's what you're used to, right? I felt my blood boil, the audacity. I snatched the papers and scanned them. They were fake, my signature wasn't even close. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. Get out of my house, Dan. Now. He didn't move, his expression shifting to something darker. Come on, Steve, don't make this difficult. We're family. That's when I knew they weren't leaving on their own. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. As I stood there waiting for them to arrive, I felt this overwhelming sense of betrayal, my own brother trying to take over my life again. When the cops showed up, they took one look at the papers and saw right through it. They told Dan and his family they had to leave, and they did, but not before giving me this look like I was the one in the wrong. As they drove off, I felt this mix of anger and relief. The house was mine, and no one was going to take that from me. That night, as I locked up the house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had finally taken back control of my life, and this time, I wasn't letting anyone drag me down.